As you progress in your career as either a photographer or videographer, there are just certain pieces of gear that make your life so much easier and really elevate your final product. In today's video, I'm going over 9 pieces of gear that I wish I had purchased so much sooner. This is the video I wish I had watched 5 years ago. So let's hop right in. In the really early days when I was just into photography and slowly getting into filmmaking, I didn't have a great ND filter. I was just using single stop cheap ND filters that I had found on Amazon. And when I purchased my first variable ND filter, that's when I realized what I was missing out on. The 2 current variable ND filter systems that I use are the Peter McKinnon 2 to 5 stop Polar Pro variable ND. And I also use a system from Freewell that is pretty similar. It is a magnetic clip-on variable ND that comes in a kit of either 1 to 5 stop or 6 to 9 stop. Now for me, what I'm looking for is just a good ND to bring down the exposure while keeping the image as clean as possible and not adding any sort of weird color casts. I use variable NDs in almost any situation, but mainly outdoors when I want to keep a shallow depth of field in my image, specifically for filmmaking, and also for photography. You want to do long exposure images. These are great tools to have. For the most part, the 2 to 5 stop Polar Pro lives on my lens at all times. I have an 82mm filter thread that is a bit larger than most of my other lenses. A great variable ND is just super convenient and it keeps your image as clean as possible. While both these VND kits are a little pricey, the Polar Pro I think it's like $200 to $250 and the Freewell system is around $300 to $400. I think it's worth putting in that little extra money to have the clean image rather than have weird vignettes, weird color casts with cheaper systems. The second piece of gear definitely helps the first piece, and those are step-up rings. Step-up rings are just metal adapters that allow you to use larger filters on smaller lenses. This saves you a lot of money from having to buy the same filters for all of your different lens filter sizes. For me, I usually just use the largest filter size and use step-up rings to then adapt these filters to smaller lenses. So for instance, the Polar Pro variable ND I have is an 82mm filter size, whereas my lenses, most of them are 67mm. So I either use a 67 to 82 step-up ring, or I'll just use multiple step-up rings in conjunction, kind of like stack them to make sure that my filter fits on my lenses. This allows me to use a variety of different filters on the various lenses that I have, and overall just makes my life a lot easier. The third piece of gear is a really cheap piece of gear, and this is an L bracket. The L bracket I have is like an $8 L bracket I got from Amazon Japan. It's basically just a screw-in L bracket that you can then attach to either a tripod or a gimbal, and allows for seamless vertical shooting. I mainly use this in conjunction for filmmaking when I shoot on a gimbal. Most of the time when I shoot for socials, for client work or personal work, I like to shoot natively vertically. So that means I like to have the actual camera body positioned vertically. And when you're using gimbals, at least up until recently, most gimbals don't have a native vertical feature. So it's just kind of a pain to try and shoot vertically on a gimbal. The L bracket is a really cheap piece of gear that allows me to go ahead and set my camera up vertically, balance everything, and then once everything balanced, it's all really easy and seamless. Once it's balanced, you can go ahead and shoot vertically, and then when you're done, you can just unscrew it and pop the camera out. It's super simple. Next up, the Gorillapod. The Gorillapod is a pretty useful tripod, and basically what it is, it's a flexible tripod that's a bit shorter than your typical tripod, but it has adjustable legs, which then allows you to attach your camera to various things like poles or different areas, or it really gives you a bit of versatility in where you go ahead and set your camera down. I found myself using this on a variety of shoots, especially with the quick release top plate that comes with Gorillapods. One thing to keep in note though is that there's actually 2 main versions of the Gorillapod. There's the 3K and the 5K. The 3K is like $40 to $50, while the 5K is like $100 to $150. And the main difference is basically the build quality and the payload that it can hold. I would highly recommend, I actually bought the 3K first, but it was way too light and way too flimsy for most of the rigs that I use for video. So if you're running something like an A7S III with a cage or an FX3 with various attachments, then I would highly recommend you use something like the 5K, just because it's a little bit stronger, a little bit sturdier, and allows you to put a little bit heavier items on there. It's a great extension also for selfie holding when you want to do vlog style content. It's just a super versatile piece of gear that I always carry. Next up, a good shotgun mic. Now I've played around with a bunch of different types of shotgun microphones, specifically the DD VMic, I think VMic Pro or VMic D3, whatever it's called. I've used Sennheiser mics. I've also used a few different Rode microphones. The microphone that I used almost daily is actually the Sony the M1. The reason why I love this specific shotgun microphone, why I think anybody who shoots on Sony should use this microphone, is because you don't have to use the audio cable. There's no external cable that you have to plug in, and it automatically syncs with your camera through the hot shoe, and it's just so easy to use. The quality of sound I find is very good for its size, and it's got a bunch of different modes ranging from spatial to very directional modes that are great for either just picking up specific talking head shots, or if you want more environmental shots, you can switch to the spatial. It's such a versatile microphone, and I wish it was out when I first started because that's the one that just lives in my camera at all times.
Welcome to this week of Peace Web Rangefinder Media Format. Today in this episode, we're doing Fujifilm GW690, which is one of my personal favorite film camera.
Is that the Fuji GW690?
This is a Oppo 7C2.
As you build out your gear kit, one thing to keep in mind is figuring out where you're going to showcase all of your work, your portfolio, in order to attract clients. That's where today's sponsor comes in clutch. Hostinger is a website development and hosting service that comes with a lot of benefits. I enjoy using Hostinger just because it's super easy and everything's streamlined. They've got an AI website builder integrated right into their system, as well as a host of other templates that you can choose from. You can make your website as detailed or as simple as you like. The website builder is a great option for people who are just getting started in website design. It's super simple, but if you'd like to do your own WordPress coding or your own WordPress design, you can either migrate a pre-existing site over or build a new website within the WordPress integration. Personally, I like to keep my website pretty simple. I just like to make sure that the client is easily able to navigate my past projects and see if I'm the right fit for their upcoming campaign. If you go to hostinger.com/gaku or just select any of the options that are available for checkout, go down to the coupon code area and input GAKU for a special 10% off discount. Thanks again, Hostinger, for sponsoring this video. Next up, an Airblower. If you've ever watched footage back and you've noticed tiny specks of dust in your sensor and you've got just like little black specks in your actual video footage, that is the worst feeling, and something that can be mitigated by using a sensor blower or an air dust blower to blow out any dust particles and clean your sensor before every shoot. These usually happen when you're switching out lenses, and sometimes it's just inevitable. But what I started doing was I bought multiple of these. I keep one in my bag at all times, and just having a cheap air dust blower, especially the bigger ones, just helps avoid the dust particles you get in your sensors at all times. It's just nice to have in your camera bag. I keep one in my bag, keep one in my studio. I just keep multiple because they're so cheap. You can get them for like $5 to $8, and they're just super handy. I can't imagine life without one. Next up, a really good SD card. Now, I've had some horror stories with SD cards. I did a bit of research and I first started using these Kingston cards that for the most part were doing well when I first started using them. Until last year on one of my shoots, I was on a shoot for Solomon, and on the third day, halfway through the day, I went ahead and went to turn on my camera, and I noticed that my card, it just said corrupted on my camera. And for whatever reason, basically halfway through the day, my card completely corrupted. I wasn't able to render any of the footage out of that card and basically lost everything that I'd shot on this card. Thankfully, it wasn't the end of the world just because we'd only shot for a few hours and I was able to reshoot parts of that in the later half of the day, and it wasn't the end of the world. But this exact scenario happened again in Korea when I was shooting for Lululemon. I was on a shoot with Peace and we were shooting an event, and halfway through the event, all of a sudden I turned on my camera and I noticed that it gave me the same error that my data had been corrupted on this exact same card. Now, I don't know if it's anything to do with these specific cards in general, but I do know that these are a bit cheaper quality than the other cards currently available. I think the most expensive ones are like the Sony Tough cards you can get. But needless to say, the worst feeling is when you're especially working on client work, you go ahead and you notice and you lose footage that you need in order to provide the actual service that you're hired for. So since then, I've switched over to the ProGrade V90 cards. I haven't had any issues with these, but I've also done additional precautionary measures. What I've done is I've gone ahead and set up the Sony FX3, which I shoot on for most client work. I do dual SD card reads. So basically it'll read to both SD card slots at the same time, which basically creates an active backup of all of your footage. That's an additional precaution that I've done. These are also like way more expensive than these, almost like double the price. But I've learned my lesson. Don't always invest in the cheapest SD cards that you can find that are compatible. Sometimes go for a little bit higher brand. I don't know. I'm not gonna throw shade at Kingston just because this might be a fluke, but it's happened to me twice in a row. And since then, I've switched over to ProGrade and switched to dual read SD card slot reading. Haven't had any issues issues since, but this is something that I wish I had done from the get-go to avoid all that footage being lost. In almost the same exact vein as the SD cards, I would highly recommend that you invest in solid state drives and not hard drives. I had another horror story last year where one of these lacy hard drives, which are extremely popular, they're pretty cool looking and really popular. A lot of people have these orange hard drives, but mine completely failed out of the blue randomly one day as I was working on a project, and I lost all my files on a 4 terabyte hard drive. Me being the person I was at the time, it was the only hard drive that I hadn't backed up, and I panicked. I sent it to Seagate. They were able to salvage most of the files, not all the files, but it was a lengthy process. It took like 2 months, and it just was not fun. Since then, I have multiple copies of all of my data backed up. I'm working on getting a NAS system set up, but I've switched all of my drives to solid state drives. Specifically, I've been using these T7 Shields by Samsung, and I haven't had any issues. They're actually much faster when you actually work off of these when you're working remote, and just loading stuff off of these it's just so much faster than these lacies. The reason why I started out using lacies is because I saw a lot of people using them. They were a much cheaper option than solid state drives, and I cheaped out and I went ahead and purchased a couple of these. But I wish I had just started out with solid state drives. They're a lot safer option. Not 100% foolproof, obviously, but they're a lot easier to use, a lot quicker to read and write off of than these orange hard drives. And last but not least, one of my favorite pieces of gear is my camera bag. I've been using the Wander Provoke, specifically the 31 liters, ever since my friend Peace recommended that camera bag to me. Before that, I was using a regular backpack that I had just kind of like jimmy rigged with some padding whenever I needed to bring my gear places, and it just was a terrible setup. I really like the Wander Provoke because of its padding. It's really comfortable on your back, and the compartments where you can go ahead and put your camera and your lenses and just the gear compartments that are padded are just really easy to use and maneuver. You can also fit your laptop, your drives, everything that you need camera gear wise fits in that bag. And not only that, but it's super comfortable. And that's something I think you should really invest in, is a good camera bag, especially if you're lugging around a lot of your gear all the time. Your back is going to really thank you over time. And for me, the Wandered bag has been my go-to for the past at least like year and a half, maybe 2 years since Peace recommended it to me. That's something I wish I had started using from day one. So those are 9 pieces of gear I wish I had purchased much sooner. This is all stuff that I use on the go, in the studio, stuff that just never leaves my toolkit. If you have any questions or recommendations, feel free to leave in the comments below. Appreciate you guys watching till the very end, and I'll see you guys in the next one.